One evening, under the dim light of a street lamp in a quiet suburban neighborhood, Officer Mark Simmons patrolled his usual route. Simmons, a white officer in his mid-30s, had a reputation for being assertive, sometimes overly so. He carried himself with an air of authority that often spilled into arrogance. Driving slowly down Maple Street, his sharp eyes caught sight of a man sitting on a bench near a small park. The man, dressed in a crisp navy blue suit with polished black shoes, seemed out of place in the otherwise casual neighborhood. His dark skin glowed under the faint light, and his calm demeanor only added to the intrigue. Simmons pulled his patrol car over and stepped out, adjusting his belt as he approached. "Hey, you!" Simmons called out, his voice sharp. The man looked up, his deep brown eyes meeting Simmons's with a steady gaze. "What are you doing here?" Simmons continued, his tone dripping with suspicion. The man raised an eyebrow but remained calm. "Sitting," he replied simply, his voice even and composed. Simmons frowned, clearly displeased with the lack of deference. "This area doesn't see many visitors like you. Got ID on you?" The man sighed softly, but reached into his inner jacket pocket, pulling out his wallet with slow, deliberate movements. He handed Simmons his driver's license. The officer glanced at it briefly, then back at the man. "Julian Coleman, huh? What brings you here, Mr. Coleman?" Simmons asked, his tone still accusatory. Julian tilted his head slightly, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I live nearby, just taking a moment to enjoy the evening before heading home." Simmons scoffed, clearly unconvinced. "Well, you'll have to forgive me if I find that hard to believe. A man like you, dressed like that, sitting here alone? Doesn't add up." Julian's smile faded slightly, though his composure remained intact. "Officer Simmons, is there a specific law I'm violating, or are you just out here making assumptions?" Simmons' eyes narrowed at the subtle challenge in Julian's words. "Watch your tone," he warned. "I'm just doing my job, making sure everything's as it should be." Julian leaned back slightly, crossing his arms. "And how should everything be, officer?" he asked, his voice calm but pointed. Before Simmons could respond, the crackle of his radio interrupted. "Unit 12, we need you back at the station for a briefing." Simmons hesitated, glaring at Julian for a moment longer before stepping back. "Don't go anywhere," he said sternly, though it was clear he had no authority to detain the man. Julian watched as Simmons returned to his patrol car and drove off, shaking his head slightly. The next morning, Officer Simmons reported to the station, still irritated by the encounter. He walked into the briefing room, where several officers were already seated. At the front of the room stood Lieutenant Morgan, a no-nonsense woman known for her strict adherence to protocol. "Good morning, everyone," Morgan began, her tone commanding attention. "Before we get into today's agenda, I'd like to introduce someone very important. Please welcome our new Chief of Police, Julian Coleman." The room erupted into polite applause as Julian stepped forward, his navy blue suit and polished demeanor instantly recognizable to Simmons. The color drained from the officer's face as he locked eyes with Julian, who offered him a small, knowing smile before addressing the group. "Thank you, Lieutenant Morgan," Julian began, his voice steady and authoritative. "It's an honor to serve as your new Chief of Police. I've spent my career working to build trust between law enforcement and the communities we serve. Accountability, fairness, and integrity are values I hold dear, and I expect the same from each of you." As Julian spoke, Simmons shifted uncomfortably in his seat, replaying the previous night's encounter in his mind. He had no doubt Julian remembered him, but the new chief gave no indication of their prior interaction. After the briefing, the officers began to file out, but Julian called out, "Officer Simmons, a moment of your time, please." Simmons froze, his colleagues casting curious glances his way as they exited. Once the room was empty, Julian leaned against the table, his expression unreadable. "Officer Simmons," he began, "last night, I encountered a police officer who judged me without cause, made baseless assumptions, and treated me with unwarranted suspicion. Do you recall this interaction? Simmons swallowed hard, his usual confidence faltering. Yes, sir, he admitted quietly. Julian nodded, his gaze steady. Good. I appreciate your honesty. Now, let me make something clear. The kind of behavior you displayed undermines the trust we work so hard to build with the community. As your chief, I will not tolerate it. Simmons nodded quickly, a bead of sweat forming on his brow. Understood, Chief. Julian straightened, his tone softening slightly. Everyone makes mistakes, Officer Simmons. What matters is how we learn from them. I trust you'll take this as an opportunity to reflect and improve. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, Simmons replied, relief washing over him as Julian dismissed him with a nod. Over the following weeks, Julian implemented a series of reforms aimed at addressing biases and improving community relations. Mandatory sensitivity training, anonymous reporting systems for misconduct, and regular community outreach programs became staples of his leadership. Simmons, meanwhile, took Julian's words to heart. He attended every training session, participated in community events, and made a conscious effort to check his biases. Slowly, he began to rebuild his reputation, both within the department and among the people he served. One evening, as Julian was leaving the station, he found Simmons waiting by the entrance. The officer looked nervous but determined. Chief Coleman, Simmons began, I just wanted to say thank you for not giving up on me. I've learned a lot these past few weeks, and I'm committed to doing better. Julian studied him for a moment before extending his hand. Accountability is a two-way street, Officer Simmons. Keep doing the work, and you'll make a difference. As Simmons shook his hand, he felt a newfound respect for the man he had once underestimated. Julian Coleman wasn't just a leader, he was a symbol of the change the department and the community needed. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and share. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications for more inspiring stories. Have a wonderful day.